Hello everyone, my name's Angel and I am from Foster's Home for Hungry Friends, and we bring to you the second part of the APES topic, biodiversity loss. Hopefully sometime earlier in the curriculum, or possibly in the first section, you understood that biodiversity refers to the diversity of life that exists within this huge world. But how exactly do we keep track of all the species that do exist in this world, and how do we know whether they've died off or not? Well, thanks to the International Union for the Conservation of Nature, or the IUCN, we are able to develop a system of statuses that known as the conservation status. Each of these statuses give an indication to whether a species still exists or how likely the species is likely to not exist in the future. So when you look at the spectrum, you can think of it as a spectrum of 0 to 100. Typically, the 80 to 100, that's a good range, and that indicates at least concerned or near threatened, and that's when you know population is in good hands. But once you get to 30 or 70%, that's when the population is threatened, and there's some factor out there that is causing this, and that is when we need to start paying attention and really take action to preserve the species, because once they are gone, they're gone. And with that, you go to the 0 to 20%, and that's the status where you know either a species is gone or it is just hard for them to exist in nature, and so they must fall under our care and protection. So one of the first statuses we talked about is extinction. And of course, once an organism is extinct, it's gone for good. There's nothing that's ever going to bring it back. And so an example of a few species that have gone extinct because of humans are the passenger pigeon in 1914, the Javan tiger in 1976, the Tasmanian tiger in 1936, or the Caribbean monk seal in 2008. The next conservation status we can look at is extinction in the wild, and this term typically refers to species that just aren't fit to survive in nature, and as a last resort they turn to human care, or rather we make an effort to try to save them. And a couple that have been placed under this section are the Hawaiian crow, the New Guinea singing dog, the California condor, or the Pina Island tortoise. The next status we are going to look at is the critically endangered status, and this basically refers to animals that are at high risk of becoming extinct, whether they are in the wild or altogether. Note that for animals to fall under this category, it turns out that for majority, they have ended up in this category because of human-related causes. And to relate this to present times, there was actually a recent incident with a 3-year-old boy who had fallen into a gorilla pit in the Cincinnati Zoo, and it just so happened that this gorilla was a part of a species known as the Western lowland gorillas, and they actually are critically endangered, and so they were placed under the zoo care. And after the boy had fallen in, the zoo officials were left between two choices to either tranquilize the gorilla or shoot the gorilla. And they ultimately came down and decided to shoot the gorilla. And it just leaves the big question as to whether these animals are even safe in our care anymore, especially after the cause was because of a human mistake. And it's just these reasons that ultimately put these species in this status. The next status we can talk about is the endangered species. And basically these are species that have begun to show signs such as population decline, that they are in fact becoming endangered, and so this is the stage where we really want to take action. And some of the species that have fallen under this category are, of course, the red panda, the Galapagos penguin, the giant panda, the Indian elephant, or even the Malayan tiger. Next status is the vulnerable status, and basically these are just species that are showing slight characteristics that they are being endangered, like I stated before, a declining population or even a decline in habitat space. And a perfect example of a species that is vulnerable is, of course, the polar bear. After learning about global warming, you probably have learned that with increasing global temperature, that ice caps are melting, and with the ice caps melting, you have rising sea levels, and the ice is receding, thus leaving polar bears without a home. And it's this struggle for life that polar bears are ultimately becoming vulnerable, And it would not be a surprise to note that these animals maybe fall into the extinct and wild category sooner or later. The next status we can talk about is the near threatened. And basically, this is the threshold for a species that to be considered a threatened species. But they are still abundant in numbers, so there is still a high chance that they can be preserved and that there are efforts that can be executed to prevent them from entering this threshold. A couple of species that do fall under this category are the beluga whale, the jaguar, the monarch butterfly, the narwhal, and even the albacore tuna. And the last conservation status that is yet to be discussed is least concerned. And basically, this is the status where there are absolutely no risk of endangerment. And a few species that do fall into this category are the Arctic fox, the Arctic whale, the brown bear, the gray whale, the swift fox, and of course, humans. And notice how all these species typically do produce many offspring and they do cover a wide range of land. Aside from the spectrum of conservation statuses, the IUCN also created what is known as a red list to elaborate to society exactly how threatened our world is. And they do utilize the conservation statuses to express to everyday members of the society just how many species are possibly extinct, or endangered, or are safe from extinction. And possibly, as stated as before, keep in mind that one huge reason that these animals do fall under these categories is because of human impact. And many factors include habitat fragmentation, increases in global temperature, chemical runoff, and even pollution. And when you think of all these factors coming together, it creates what possibly may be the sixth mass extinction. And it is said that at this current rate in 5 centuries, 75% of species could be extinct. And it's important to understand that in this world, there is a huge web of life. And when we face issues like biodiversity loss because of these human causes, it really does affect not only those who are struggling for survival, but us as a whole. Some may think that we can simply exist without certain species, but even those species carry a niche in this huge web of life, and without one or the other, it's possible that this whole web of life could fall to pieces. Aside from that, a couple of important laws that do regard biodiversity are important to know on the AP exam are the Multiple Use Act of 1920, basically understanding that the national forests are managed for resources such as timber, watershed, outdoor recreation, and wildlife and fish purposes. CITES, the Convention on International Trade in Endangered Species of Wild Fauna and Flora. Basically, it's an agreement between governments to ensure that the international trade in wild animals and plants do not threaten their survival. Another one to also be aware of is the Marine Mammal Protection of 1972, and that is an established federal responsibility to conserve marine animals. And last but not least, the Endangered Species Act of 1973. Basically, this one provided a program for the conservation of threatened and endangered plants and animals and habitats in which they are found. I find this act to be one of the most important because it does call for conservative programs and actions and practices that seek to protect and save not only just the animals, but save the entire web of life from collapsing. Well, that is it for today. We hope this video really justified and elaborated on how detrimental biodiversity loss is on the environment, and we hope that you do go out and seek more information and understand what you could possibly do to help save the biodiversity in this world.